G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day. So far, a fantastic week. Now, as always, we do have a lot to go over. But if you'd like to support the channel, the merch link is down below to come and join the PMC or come and join the Telegram as well. Now, what are we going to speak about today? Well, we need to look at some strikes, some videos, and some confirmation of strikes as well, and why this is interesting to us and confirmation of other strikes. We need to then look at the maps and see where things are moving and some geolocated footage. We'll look at another country that's now cut diplomatic ties, but where we need to start, of course, is the offensive that Ukraine has pushed across into the Kursk Oblast in Russia, this northern incursion. Now, where are we talking about? So here's Ukraine, the center. Here's the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 14, and down in the east and the south, this is where the majority of the fighting has occurred. But we have seen Russia launch offensives in the north of Ukraine heading south, and Ukraine also over the past year and a half also launched now offensives back into Russia. And where we've seen this take place is between Sumy and Kursk in around this Sudza region. Now, in my opinion, and from following this war very closely, ever since the first of these incursions, each one since has been a little bit less effective. And I believe that potentially there's a bit of like chasing the dragon for the success of that very first incursion. And in my military assessment, I can't see any offensive actions in this direction or in barely any direction at the moment from Ukraine being a good move with my knowledge of attritional warfare with the manpower shortages that Ukraine has. And of course, not only that, but Russia having the personnel numerical advantage currently. And we're going to look at the doctrine, we're going to look at all the geolocations in here, and we're going to look at potentially what could this be if it is something larger. Now, for those saying that this is to redirect Russia's troops from the Pokrovsk front, and I'll show you that area because Russia is having success today as they've had over the past 6 months in this area, what I will say is this will have, of course, the same effect on the Ukrainian side. And if you're looking at redirecting soldiers, well, it is going to be have more effect on the Ukrainian side when, if you're on offensive actions, typically you need more men in the fight. So typically Ukraine here would need more men on the offense than Russia will have on the defensive. And Ukraine has, of course, manpower shortages, and you've got Ukrainian forces on the front line begging for reinforcements or rotation or demobilization due to the length that they've been there. Now, let's look over the geolocations, what this could be, some theories, and what some other people have pointed out. So we do have, I guess, a lot to go over in this, but this is sort of what I was alluding to in this, and a very popular Ukrainian blogger here on Twitter. The situation in the Pokrovsk direction is critical. That's down in the east, with defences in several areas collapsed and yet to stabilise, largely due to a shortage of personnel, diverting nearly a brigade to launch an assault on Kursk Oblast, which lacks strategic sense and borders on mental disability. Now, David here says, Rector unit of the 488, and more Russians are rushing in. So he's alluding to that it's to draw Russians away from here. And this guy says you need to consider the broader theatre. The Russians are holding their reserve forces, including guards battalions and logistics bases, conscripts, territorial defence units, and FSB rapid reaction forces, and some leftover units from the previous planned Sumy operation. This is an operation that never took place. We know Russia was putting a heap of troops into the Kursk Oblast around here to have a cross into Ukraine on another front, but that never actually then transpired and occurred. So there's leftover stuff here, at least from what he's saying. We're losing ground in key areas like New York and Donetsk right now. We'll look at geolocations of there, with Russian forces pushing closer to Pokrovsk. Yet we're talking about some secondary re-units in Kursk Oblast, which affect the situation on the front line where it matters. And this is what I was speaking about with the attritional warfare and offensives in here. So this goes through all the stages of here, but you have the initiation of the war, and you're going to have massive losses in this in modern times. And then you need to mobilize enough forces, like they say, in available large numbers that are ready for combat operations. Now, it's saying that after this, then the combat solidifies. You are making a solid front, defensive works, all of this. And this period lasts 1.5 to 2 years. Now, I've used this exact doctrine before when I've spoken about Russia had massive losses in the beginning. What then they do? They formed then that solid front, especially in the south and the east, with then the defensive works that we saw. No massive offensive actions other than Bakhmut, but that is an outlier because it was then a PMC, not the Russian military forces, at least under that umbrella. So you know what I mean. And then we've seen that offensive actions should be avoided in this period. Now, what I want to point to in this is I think Ukraine is currently in this phase where they've had some losses. They're rebuilding then defensive works on the defensive. But during this period, major offensive operations should be avoided. Even if large attacks are successful, they will result in significant casualties, often for meaningless territorial gains. So even if attacks in some areas are successful, the amount of casualties it will take and what you will actually get may be meaningless. Now, of course, we don't have everything at our fingertips that the chain of command and the rank will have that have launched offensives like this, but it doesn't seem to line up with what we are seeing in other areas. And this is where people are pointing to, is it some level of Hail Mary attempt to try and stop the bleeding of Donetsk, try and get some to try and swap back, as Ukraine has been messaging that there will be a peace summit in November that they want Russia to attend, and they want the guns to fall silent after that. So, and what we've spoken about with this then peace summit is this is going on Zelensky's 10-point peace plan, which is on the basis of territorial integrity and sovereignty on the 1991 borders. And without victories on the battlefield, or I guess some area to try and swap back, how much leverage is Ukraine going to have at current time for that conference? That's something, I guess, to think about. But it's the quote, and I know the quote, but I have no idea who said it, so if someone could help me out with this. But to send men into battle with the knowledge that they are to be sacrificed to the gods of war is a crime against humanity. And I can't see how successful long-term this will be, but we are unsure. And people have spoken to this last-ditch effort. And there was a comment here, I've cropped your name out because I don't want to make anyone go and abuse you, but perhaps a last-ditch effort before being forced negotiations with the West. The West has, 2 to 3 other wars heating up, and we can't supply them all. Ukraine war takes a massive supply of munitions on a constant basis with no end in sight. So if the West is pressuring Ukraine to end this war through negotiations, this could be one last big effort to gain something for stronger leverage for the negotiations. Now, that could be true. Now, what we're going to look at in this, and I promise we will look at the footage, but I need to talk about why these may be taking place first, because it doesn't maybe on the surface make sense, but look at that amount to gain some territory. And we talked about this sent over from a very knowledgeable friend of mine when we spoke about what would happen in Ukraine if then the borders were drawn somewhere else with some of the other groups we know operate outside or under the MOD, but maybe not very publicised due to some ideologies and some other bits and pieces. Look into who is running some of the then Russian legions and stuff, what they call it. That Ukraine would do them well to say, hey, support is going. If you demand the 91 borders, we need some decisive victories. We need you to go all out, penetrate the Russian line and make some gains so we have a better negotiation position. Worst case, they get smashed and the radicals' issue is reduced. Best case, you get a better negotiating position. In both cases, it's likely those screaming hardest for the continuation of the war will see how difficult that is to facilitate. So, could it be to try and gain something back? Now, this large pro-Ukrainian account here, he has pointed to this, that this is the Kursk nuclear power plant. Now, there's a few things I want to speak on this, but I do have the geolocation for where the Kursk nuclear power plant is. So this, of course, is the border between Ukraine and Russia. This is Saduza. So this is about where Ukraine got up to in the push in. We're not exactly sure. I'll show you a couple of maps in a second, but could it be trying to get to this power plant? Now, firstly, what I will say, is this would really go against Zelensky's 10-point peace plan, because number one in his peace plan, which is getting put forward, which the EU, NATO say is the only way forward, point one is nuclear security. So I think that may fall over there, but I want to speak on something like this more in a second. But I actually just want to give this lad here, this Dimko Zelentenko, sorry for pronunciation of your name, some credit. He is, NAFO pro-Ukrainian account. And of course, we know Ukraine has a manpower shortage, and he is the only one that I've actually seen actively who's going to actually help that shortage, which Ukraine need. I was declared fit for military service. I decided to join Ukraine's army to combat role, and I went through the same process that everyone else in the country and got my departure date. And he talks about having to jump through a whole lot of loopholes. I'm not sure if he has physical injuries or whatever, but a lot of doctors, a lot of loopholes. So he's actually going to sign up and fight. We know those manpower shortages can be fixed by people volunteering. And I see things like this too. And Mr. Tate's brother here, comprehend what's happening in the front right now, is moving against our favour, and that's why we need to step up and support. And goes, well, go and fight, you and your friends and male family members. So this is something as well that I think, we need to bang, it's a threat to this, threat to that. You can go up and fight, and you don't actually need any prior military experience either. I know plenty of guys with no prior military experience. But that is just a side note. But I want to talk about this power plant and some interesting bits here as well from another very experienced friend of mine. I won't say who, maybe one day we'll have a chat. But speaking of false flags, and this was actually from well over a month ago. I was saving it for something else, but I think it's relevant to talk about now. I wonder why the Russian Volunteer Corps haven't been used for more clandestine ops against Russian assets worldwide, as their efforts in Russia are largely counterproductive and likely galvanizing of support in Russia for the war. If you look at, there's a form called, or a booklet called the Victory Has 1,000 Fathers. It talks about insurgency and counterinsurgency and what is effective and what is ineffective. And if you read that, you'll go through and go, well, this isn't going to be effective for how it's working. But go and look that up. Victory Has 1,000 Fathers. Same as the creep to allowing Western weapons for Ukrainian strikes in Russia. If you're trying to prove that you're purely defending yourselves, you kind of need to not kill Russian civilians. But Russians attacking Russian assets worldwide is a whole other thing. The FSB, GRU doing it in Europe, so it's fair play in my book. Just wait, we're building on this. So it talks about 2 separate fires and separate sites within a week at these properties. Danish company with excellent safety procedures have been quietly attributed to Russian sources, most likely achieved through placing agents in cleaning team who could plant devices in largely unsupervised. My time working here, it's civilian contractors who were always an issue. Never a week went without cleaners swiping laptops or enabling access for criminal gangs. Now, I asked about, I said, the Russians, the volunteer corps, there might be some Russians, but a lot of them are Ukrainians or foreigners. He goes, you don't need the name. You only need the name, not the personnel. So alluding to, well, you've said that this group is Russians fighting Russians. So if they do something, it's not going to be linked back. It's plausible deniability back to Ukraine. Could we see potentially more of this occurring? Now let's look at a couple of maps from Syriac and Noel reports as well. So we're talking about in this area here. It's not clear. It will become more clear over the next 24 hours what happened here. Deep State hasn't given any update on what has happened here. No blue, no green, no grey. So if we zoom in just a little bit around this area, what we will see near Saduza, we will see then the reservoirs right in here. Sorry, I was trying to find myself. So these reservoirs just here. We open up then his map. We see the border location here. This crossing up to then this second reservoir as well as out to Zverdelkovo. So again, we're not sure how deep these actually got. If we go from where this is, say 6Ks, go to here, say 2Ks or 3Ks. So it's still fairly limited, but there's still an incursion across the border there. We look then at Syriac. Now his is a fair bit more in depth, but around this area, this is the reservoir, shows very similar amounts of area, but shows significantly more out towards this Soduza area as well. Ukrainian military launched a border military operation across the Sumy Oblast to the Russian territory of Kursk. After several hours of fighting, the situation around the border localities is diffuse and dynamic. But several of these villages, are at least out of Russian control or surrounded by Ukrainian troops that have not yet been expelled from Russian territory. They're still under control of areas. This operation has nothing to do with the previous operations that Ukrainian command had previously carried out, in which they supported a Russian national contingent in an attempt to penetrate Belgrade and Kursk. In this case, a large number of Ukrainian soldiers participate in the attack, which has been well planned in the previous months and has caused important losses of the Russian soldiers around the locality of Suduza. So this is an element which may unravel some of what we spoke about, but I think that's still relevant for if there could be a use of those groups in other areas. But like we've seen, like the photographs I'm about to show you, this is significantly more Western kit being used. So let's have a look at some of the kit used and then kit destroyed. And as I put on my Telegram, it seems like what we're seeing is just a lot of Ukrainian stuff that has been destroyed. So we'll look at some of the Russian equipment destroyed and or used and the Ukrainian equipment too. While we're just in this area, while we're on the map around Suduza, I want to show you then here on the defensive works. So this is where then these reservoirs are. This is Suduza. So I haven't seen anything yet that would actually indicate that Ukraine has been able to penetrate this second main defensive line off the already existing border defenses in place. So this is something we'll keep an eye on as other maps shift and move. So some of the most recent stuff we've got is this is a Kar-52 chopper down here, a Russian attack helicopter. Now, to my eye, this looks like it has been hit and then has crashed. These are heavily armed. They also have ejection seats on them. They blow off then the double prop. So it does look like it has come down, and you can sort of see that the canopy has been opened. So likely that they may have then survived this. There's also a lot of footage of shelling happening in Suduza, Ukrainian shelling into Suduza here in civilian built up areas too. Of course, there may be military here, but still part of areas like this is to get then, if you're planning on doing like some military operation or with other groups as a kind of insurgency here, having the civilian support on your side. And this is what it was always about with the Russian Volunteer Corps, is we're going in, we're going to gain the civilian support, and we're going to steamroll through Russia, which has not then occurred. So we see these are Russian tanks on the back of flatbed trucks. And if we have a look at where then this is geolocated and near Suduza, it does look that these were, they're heading in the direction of the border, that they were heading in the direction of the border and have been hit, we presume, by drones here, so as reinforcement. So a couple of tanks then taken out here. We have seen several Russian soldiers be taken as POWs here as well. These are the Ukrainian soldiers here. These are the Russians in the middle of the grouping here. Interestingly, these are then right on the border. Now, large losses or large prisoners on the border would be expected because, of course, that initial move across is going to be like an ambush on those positions. So I'm not surprised to see either large losses or large prisoners taken. We also have seen that Russian Su-25 Frogfoot close air support aircraft are in action around this area, then flying around. We can see also that there are vehicles on fire here, appearing to be a fuel truck. If I just skip forward, too far, that there is a fuel truck on fire here as well. Now, Russia is responding into then the Sumy Oblast, then dropping FABs on buildups of Ukrainian forces here as well. So there's a few videos of this now floating around. So, of course, attacking back across. And it does seem like a lot of the Ukrainian losses have actually been in Ukrainian territory, not actually that have made it then into then the Russian territory here. So let's have a look at this. So we have seen US vehicles in this as well. So this is a Russian drone then looking upon US supplied Striker infantry fighting vehicles here as well, tracking these vehicles. This is then geolocated to here, so still within Ukrainian territory. Then we will see there are a number of strikes from Lancet drones against abandoned Ukrainian vehicles here as well. I can't make out what vehicle that was, but This was geolocated up near then the second reservoir, of which we then spoke about. One of the big important losses that Ukraine had was 2 books. This air defense have been taken out by Russian cluster munitions. Now, these are commonly known, I guess, as the Frankenbook, as it is a mix of a couple of things, but again, an important air defense asset taken out here, and then a second one being tracked and then taken out there as well. Geolocation to this is just to the east of Sumy, which will be supplying air defense and radar into these areas here as well. We have a Ukrainian column that's been taken out with Iskanders. We'll look at the geolocation. So column down this, then tree line, large Iskander bang, and a number of spot fires, and then positions here too. Let's look at the geo confirmation on this. This is just, again, around this main road on where this then reservoir is, moving in on, if we call this an invasion, like we saw the Russian invasion. Very, very difficult if you start to get not only hit, but then outside of your sphere of influence of your other items, your drones, your artillery, on where that frontline element is moving. This is some of the first footage we saw. Now, this is geolocated to here, so it's up in the same region of where the crossing took place, but on the Ukrainian side was Ukrainian Humvees, so American supplied vehicles with new then battle symbols on them as well. And then we do see a number of then drops by Russian drones here as well. Now, we have more footage as well of one of the strikers with an anti-mine roller on it, the confirmation of those, as well as a little bit more of some Ukrainian vehicles moving here. This is a bit of a mashup of some of them taken out by Russian pages here, primarily by then Lancet drones. So it has seemed to be fairly costly so far. That said, that's what you'd expect in offensive actions. Again, what the question is does Ukraine have the capital, both in men and machine, to be launching operations somewhere like here in an attempt to draw Russian forces away? Or is this the beginning to some other larger operation into Russia here to try and increase Ukraine's leverage if they sit at a negotiating table in the future? Because currently, in my perspective, if they were to sit down right here and now, a lot of the cards are in Russia's favour. And this is from the Russian MOD. At 8 o'clock Moscow time, 300 Ukrainian militants from the AFU and 22nd Mechanized Brigade, supported by 11 tanks and more than 20 armoured fighting vehicles, launched an attack following the preparatory fire at the positions of the Russian state border, covering force near, then here, of course, Kursk region. He's saying that they repelled the attacks, inflicted fire damage, and operational tactical and ground attack aircraft delivered strikes. So Su-25, Kar-52s, of course, we've got that photograph of Kar-52. There's another photograph floating around that they say is another one getting hit, but wait and see on that. As a result, AFU losses amounted to 16 units of hardware, including 6 tanks, 2 IFVs, and 4 APC, and armoured fighting vehicles and counter-obstacle vehicle. So something like a mine roller, which we may have seen then before. So that's what they're saying, claims as well. Like I've said, any MOD claims, think of the largest grain of salt you can take, double it, think of that regardless of the MOD at this point. So we'll keep you updated on what is happening here. What is your thoughts on it? Do you think I'm down the wrong path? Do you think I'm down the right path? Is it the start to something larger? Is it an attempted PR win here because things are moving to try and distract from the situation happening? Is it a try and have like a swap back? I don't know. So let's actually have a look at some other strikes. Now, what have I been saying? When there are major strikes against equipment, what we do, we give it a couple of days, and voila, footage starts arriving, confirming what has then taken place. But I say on the flip of that, if footage does not come out, don't believe it. The issue with this is people just take the word just as gospel. Yep, that's it. Is many YouTubers, even military think tanks, and I fear even official militaries, take these claimed numbers, use them as false, and they use this in their predictions of when X side is going to run out of some pieces of equipment. Now, We have some more footage of the Morozovsk airbase here too. So some of these then bombs have been completely destroyed, and we have then this footage here. There's a few more photographs, but I'll show you these. This is that guard tower of whoever the builder is, reserves a rise, and a lot of these munitions and fabs and stuff here have been completely destroyed in that massive bang that we saw, as well as confirmation that a Su-34 here, you can tell by the duck nose and the side-by-side seating, has been completely destroyed in here. We had claims of multiple, we had at least one, and most likely two others have been damaged. You can see it then lying down with the tail, or is that under the wing here? But regardless, absolutely shattered there as well in that attack. Now let's have a look on the maps and see what is then shifting. Now we have here where there's been a Ukrainian and a Russian shift. Now, we've been speaking about this for about a week and a half near Holyboki, that Ukraine did have an advancement in here, and then it did seem like Russia then actually had pushed then the Ukrainians back. This map showed none of that, but it now updates to actually show very similar to then this, that Ukraine had an advancement by the green check and that Russia had one by the red check. So we actually believe Ukraine got right around into almost this intersection here at one point, but then Russia had a counterattack on then this northern front. We have no update on that today because it is a few weeks old, at least from if we look at Syriac. Now, can see further push out of then New York in here. And this is, we'll just call this the Toretsk and Pokrovsk front, the area of which people are worried about that is slowly falling, but it is grinding forwards and could speed up if defensive lines then start to crumble further back too, which can happen. That is attritional warfare. You grind until you end up with your enemy on the back foot. This is the area people worried about that could be withdrawing troops away up in the north. We have geolocated footage here in New York confirming then that advancement shown on the map. Russian soldier here, then flying a flag and removing then the Ukrainian flag and burning it on top of the building. Now this is geolocated to here. I've got my screenshot. So right on where the end of this border is. So it could be still further forward than this. Now reports, he is confirming advancement in the same direction. Syriac map confirming advancement, same direction. We know that is continuing to grind forward in this area, and this is a concern, putting defensive lines that have held for 10 years under threat. Now we come just to the southwest of here, and we do see just a small sliver made around Zeleny here as well. But of course, this is putting threat on the defensive works and troops in these open territories here, and we may see a step back at some point from here. As well, we come down Ugledar front. We just see this paddock has then been shifted up here. Of course, Russia is heading for this road. The grey zone here shows up to this road, but some maps show very different on this. But wait and see. We know there has been advancement here, as well as the grey zone move through Paraskovskia. If you have the Syriac map of the time here, Paraskovskia is said to be basically under control by the Russians, as well as they're in the first areas of Konstantinivka. Here, of course, what then puts threat on this road through Vodiany and Ugledar. No change in Robotny. Shock horror. Now, last thing I want to speak about is Mali, and this is diplomacy coming out my fucking ears. So the main news of the day is Niger. Reading this as a YouTuber, your whole career could be cancelled like a second, but joins Mali in breaking diplomatic ties with Ukraine. The African nation of Niger is severing diplomatic relations with Ukraine 2 days after neighbouring Mali made similar announcement following reports of rebel clashes with Wagner mercenaries. Now, I'm going to speak about a few things in this and what went down. So after we saw the Mali soldiers and Wagner mercenaries were killed in that ambush and then taken prisoner as well, Ukraine's main director of intelligence, GUR, Andriy Yusov, said this: the insurgents received the necessary information, and not only the information that allowed to conduct a successful military operation against Russian war criminals. About the details, we definitely want to talk about them, but there will be a continuation. So this is basically confirming we had some involvement in this, as well as photographs of white guys who aren't very prevalent in this area of the world, holding Ukrainian flags. I said that isn't, I said at the time, and I'll continue to say, that isn't beyond reasonable doubt that it could be other troops from somewhere else holding a flag. I'll take that. We also had, though, members of the Tuareg saying that they had support from not only Ukraine, but then other nations too, and articles then prior to this saying that Ukraine is training insurgents, rebels in areas on drones. We've also seen it in Sudan and in Syria and other areas too. So this is a lot of evidence that there was something occur in here. Now, what we then saw was Mali cut all diplomatic ties with Ukraine. Now, Ukraine basically turned around and said that this was baseless. There was no evidence of this, and this is then ridiculous. Now, as you can see, it's like we have flipped back on what was said. At the same time, Ukraine's foreign minister heads to Africa on the 4th of August, a couple of days ago, to support in war against Russia. Of course, what Ukraine's trying to do is get the support of then the global south and Africa, and especially areas where Russia has a lot of influence. And that the Sahel alliance, we see Mali, Niger, both have pulled out of diplomatic ties, and potentially we'll see others. Something that is very interesting too is only then yesterday the US completed withdrawal from the last base in Niger as well, day after diplomatic ties being cut too. Like I've spoken about, it's like voting. You don't need to get the voters that are already going to vote for you or already going to vote for the other candidate. You need to get the swing states, the swing voters, or like this, Ukraine doesn't need to bring on Germany or Australia or America on board. They're already on board. They need to bring on board the countries of which Russia may have more influence for pressure, or that they're sitting on the fence of. And this will all become more relevant when we go into whatever deals, negotiations, whatever move forward into the future. But the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs statement saying that, basically saying that this never occurred, I don't know. I believe that there was definitely some involvement there, but there's been a flip once those ties had been cut. Anyway, legends, that is all that I have for you today. Look after yourselves, have a fantastic day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.